Ghost of Grancer Harrison. The legend of William Grancer Harrison, known as the Dancing Ghost of Coffee County, Alabama, centers on his unique personality, extravagant lifestyle, and the spectral events said to occur at his gravesite. Harrison, born around 1789 in Edgefield County, South Carolina, eventually established a prosperous plantation near Cripple Creek and Pea River in what is now Kinston, Alabama. A successful cotton planter, Harrison was one of the largest slaveholders in the region and was widely regarded for hosting grand social events on his estate. Harrison was known for his passion for gatherings, including barbecues, horse races, and lively dances. To accommodate these celebrations, he had his slaves construct a dance hall where he often donned his special clogs, reserved exclusively for the spirited dances he adored. These parties became a hallmark of his life, embodying his love of joy and festivity. Then, as Harrison aged, he began planning for his final resting place, determined to carry his love for merriment into the afterlife. He instructed his slaves to transport bricks from a kiln in Milton, Florida, to build a grand above-ground tomb. His instructions were precise, being that he would be buried in his dance clothes and clogs, lying on his feather bed within earshot of his beloved dance hall, ensuring that even in death, he could remain connected to the festivities that he loved. Harrison then died in 1860, and his burial was carried out according to his wishes. Though his Saturday night dances continued briefly after his passing, they quickly lost their appeal without him, and the dance hall fell into disrepair. Following his death, the Civil War further devastated the Harrison family, claiming the lives of his son and at least one grandson, leaving the plantation in decline. The eerie tales began soon after all this. Late on Saturday nights, locals claimed to hear the unmistakable sounds of fiddles and the rhythmic stomping of dancers emanating from Harrison Cemetery. Some even reported a booming voice calling out square dances, accompanied by the faint strains of music. These spectral sounds convinced many that Harrison's spirit still lingered near his tomb, eternally recreating the lively gatherings that he cherished in life. And adding to the legend were rumors of gold buried either with Harrison or somewhere on his property near the ruins of the dance hall. Because of the legend, in 1964, vandals dynamited his tomb, scattering his skeletal remains in a futile search for treasure. But despite their efforts, no gold was ever found. Then, over the years, Harrison's tomb has been rebuilt multiple times, only to face repeated desecration. The last documented vandalism occurred in 2010, when numerous headstones in the cemetery were overturned. But regardless though, even though it's marked by decay and repeated vandalism, it still remains a focal point for those interested by the tale of the dancing ghost. Bill Sketoe's Hole. The story of Bill Sketoe and the mysterious hole that will not stay filled in Newton, Alabama, is one of the South's most endearing ghostly tales. The legend is rooted in the Civil War era, which was a time of turmoil and harsh justice, when accusations and suspicions often led to tragic outcomes. Sketoe, who was a Methodist preacher, became the central figure in this haunting narrative. It all started in December 1864 during the waning days of the Confederacy, when Bill Sketoe found himself mixed in the brutal politics of war. According to the tale, Sketoe had returned home to care for his ailing wife, leaving his service in the Confederate Army. It was said that he had hired a substitute to fight in his stead, a common practice early in the war, but later outlawed by the Confederacy. However, local members of the Home Guard, led by Captain Joseph Brary, accused him of desertion. Some accounts even suggest that Sketoe may have been suspected of aiding Unionists or deserters, charges that carried severe consequences in a lawless and desperate region. The Home Guard then captured Sketoe near the Choctawhatchee River in Newton. They prepared to execute him by hanging, selecting a tree limb for the task. Sketoe, a tall man, stood on tiptoes as the noose tightened around his neck, his height preventing the intended outcome. One of the guards, a man using a crutch, reportedly dug a hole beneath Sketoe's feet, enabling the hanging to proceed. Sketoe's final moments were then marked by his prayer, not for himself, but for the forgiveness of his executioners. what followed his death was the genesis of a legend. The hole dug beneath Sketoe's feet became the focal point of the whole story. Locals began to notice that the hole, roughly 30 inches wide and 8 inches deep, seemed to resist being filled. No matter how much dirt or debris was used to cover it, the hole would reappear, swept clean as if by unseen hands. The eerie persistence of the hole led to whispers that Sketoe's ghost lingered at the site, with his feet brushing against the ground, keeping the spot clear. The haunting reputation of the site then grew, fueled by tales of mysterious occurrences and the apparent curses that befell Sketoe's executioners. For example, Captain Briar, who led the home guard, reportedly died under strange circumstances, struck by a falling tree limb on a clear day. Others who were involved in the hanging were said to have met equally bizarre and untimely deaths, including fatal lightning strikes and unexplained falls. And the phenomenon of the hole itself basically endured for over a century. Some speculated that a friend of Sketoe secretly maintained the hole as a tribute, while others firmly believed in its supernatural origins. The hole that will not stay filled then became a defining symbol of the story, embodying the lingering unrest of Sketoe's spirit and the unresolved questions surrounding his death. It was then in 1990 that the Choctawhatchee River flooded and the site of the hole was buried beneath tons of rock during efforts to stabilize the nearby bridge. Though the physical hole no longer exists, a replica has been created near the original location, accompanied by a sign recounting the legend. Sketoe's grave, located at the Mount Carmel Cemetery in nearby Echo, Alabama, also remains another touchpoint for those interested by the legend. The face in the courthouse window. The story of the face in the courthouse window at the Pickens County Courthouse in Carrollton, Alabama, centers around Henry Wells, who was a freedman accused of arson after the burning of the Pickens County Courthouse in 1876. The courthouse, which had been newly rebuilt after being destroyed during the Civil War, burned again under mysterious circumstances. Historical records indicate that Henry Wells was charged with the crime after being implicated by another man, Bill Buckhalter, who had confessed to a related burglary but claimed Wells was responsible for the fire. But although there was little direct evidence connecting Wells to the actual arson, he was still regardless arrested in 1878. When law enforcement confronted him, Wells reportedly tried to escape and was shot twice. He ended up succumbing to his injuries 5 days later, but not before allegedly confessing to the courthouse fire. There is significant debate though over the legitimacy of this confession, with many believing it was coerced under duress. The courthouse burning itself was also a point of tension for the community, which had faced economic and social challenges following the Civil War. The first courthouse had been destroyed by Union soldiers under General John T. Croxton during a raid on Carrollton, where they also burned the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. The loss of this important local institution twice within 12 years left a pretty lasting scar on the town. By the time Wells was apprehended, the townspeople were demanding justice, even if it meant acting on little evidence. The folklore surrounding the face in the courthouse window then suggests that Wells, while held in the courthouse's garret awaiting trial, addressed the mob that had gathered below, proclaiming his innocence and threatening to haunt those who saw his death. Then, as the story goes, a lightning bolt struck as Wells looked out the window, permanently leaving his terrified expression in the glass. The mob later broke into the courthouse, took Wells, and lynched him. Early the next morning, someone passing by the courthouse reportedly saw Wells's face in the window, and despite attempts to clean or replace the pane, the image had persisted. In contrast to this folklore, historical records kinda challenge the accuracy of these events. Documents indicate that the windows in the courthouse were not actually installed until several weeks after Wells's death. This discrepancy suggests that the story may have developed through the blending of two separate events, being the lynching of Nathaniel Pierce, who was a man accused of murder, and Wells's arrest and subsequent death. And local newspapers such as the West Alabamian provide some evidence of these events but don't really support all elements of the legend. The handcuffs believed to have restrained Wells during his arrest also are displayed at the Pickens County Courthouse as part of the story's preservation. The image in the window, though, remains visible in the lower right pane of the garret room, drawing visitors to the courthouse to this day. Some even claim that the window's glass survived a hailstorm that broke every other pane in the building. But regardless of all this, while the legend continues to fascinate locals and visitors, it kinda also highlights the social and racial tensions of the Reconstruction era. The story reflects broader themes of injustice, fear, and unresolved guilt that shaped much of the South's post-Civil War history. Interpretations of the tale vary, with some emphasizing Wells's supposed curse and others viewing the story as a distorted retelling of historical events. Red Lady of Huntingdon College. The Red Lady of Huntingdon College is tied to the history of the institution now located in Montgomery. Huntingdon originally began as a Tuskegee female college in 1854, where the first accounts of the Red Lady appeared. Students reported seeing a glowing figure in a red gown and carrying a red parasol walking silently through the halls of the dormitory, with her form bathed in a creepy crimson light. But although the apparition vanished without explanation and didn't return, her presence left a lasting impression on those who saw her. In 1910, when the college relocated to Montgomery and was renamed the Women's College of Alabama, the original Red Lady was thought to have been left behind. However, the story evolved when another figure named Martha, or sometimes Margaret, began haunting the new campus. Martha was said to be a young woman from a wealthy New York family sent to Huntingdon by her father's wishes after his death. Deeply unhappy about leaving her home, Martha arrived at Huntingdon dressed in red and brought with her red furnishings, including curtains, bed linens, and even a red prayer rug from Turkey. Her affinity for the color red became a defining characteristic, symbolizing both her isolation and the ghostly lore surrounding her. For backstory, it's said that Martha struggled to adjust to life at the college. Her shy demeanor and unwillingness to socialize were often mistaken for arrogance, making it difficult for her to form friendships. Her initial roommate found her company unbearable and requested to move out, setting off a pattern as one roommate after another left the room, unable to cope with Martha's cold, distant behavior. Even the dormitory president, known for her warm personality and ability to get along with others, could not break through Martha's emotional barriers. When the president decided to leave, Martha bitterly warned her that she would regret the decision. As Martha became more isolated, her behavior grew more disturbing. She began wandering the dorm halls at night, opening doors without explanation, and standing silently in rooms, staring blankly as if caught in a trance. These nocturnal visits alarmed her fellow students, who avoided her at all costs. Despite their efforts, the atmosphere in Pratt Hall became heavy with unease. Then it's said that one evening, after Martha had been absent from classes and meals all day, the dormitory president decided to check on her. Approaching Martha's room on the 4th floor, she noticed a strange red light emanating from the transom above the door. When she entered the room, she found Martha's lifeless body on the floor, draped in a red bedspread, having taken her own life by slashing her wrists. Following Martha's death, reports of strange occurrences began to circulate. Students claimed to see a glowing red light radiating from her room, and her ghost was said to walk the halls of Pratt Hall, with her presence accompanied by an inexplicable chill. These sightings are especially common on the anniversary of her death, when the 4th floor is said to come alive with disturbing activity. And although Pratt Hall is no longer used as a dormitory, the legend of the Red Lady still endures. Visitors and students continue to share accounts of seeing a red apparition or feeling some presence of unease near her former room. Some speculate that Martha's restless spirit still remains as a cautionary reminder of the consequences of isolation and rejection. Pegues Ghost. The story of Pegues Ghost originates in Cahaba, Alabama, the state's first capital and later its most prominent ghost town. Cahaba, which was abandoned after the Civil War and largely uninhabited for over a century, was home to many notable individuals and events, but none more mysterious than the glowing apparition associated with Colonel C.C. Pegues' stately home. Colonel Pegues was a prominent figure in Cahaba. His residence, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens and a maze of cedars, became a social hub during the town's peak. The house was overall known for its hospitality, and its grounds offered a quiet retreat from the stresses of the Civil War. Many residents and visitors saw solace in the labyrinthine paths of the maze, which was a favored spot for courtships and private conversations. Then, in 1862, during the Civil War, the first sightings of what became known as Pegues Ghost were reported. Basically, on a moonlit evening, a young couple walking near the maze encountered an unusual phenomenon, which was a glowing white spherical light. The luminous orb appeared to float a few feet above the ground and moved erratically along the pathways. It darted from one side of the walk to the other, disappearing into the shrubbery only to reappear moments later. The couple, startled but curious, tried to rationalize the event as a trick of the moonlight. However, when the gentleman attempted to approach and actually touch the light themselves, it evaded his grasp and vanished into the darkness. This encounter was not isolated though. Over time, other residents and visitors claimed to witness the same glowing orb near the maze and gardens. The light, which seemed to move with almost playful intent, became a source of fascination and speculation. Some claimed it was because of natural phenomena like phosphorescence or will-o'-the-wisp, while others believed it was a supernatural manifestation linked to Colonel Pegues himself. The story took on a deeper significance too following the colonel's death. In June 1862, Colonel Pegues was mortally wounded at the Battle of Gaines's Mill in Virginia and died shortly afterward. His passing led many to believe that the ghostly light was an omen, perhaps as a warning to the town or to the recruits he had once rallied for his regiment. Others, though, believed that the apparition represented the colonel's lingering spirit, tied to the gardens he had cherished and the life he had left behind. As Cahaba then began to decline, marked by floods and the economic toll of the war, the sightings of Pegues' ghost persisted. The light's movements, which were darting, disappearing, and reappearing, mirrored the nature of the town's fortunes. The colonel's home and gardens, which were once vibrant with life and activity, became overgrown and abandoned, much like the rest of the town. But the ghostly orb still, however, remains a constant in the collective memory of Cahaba's residents. The Crying Spirit at the Well. The story of the Crying Spirit at the Well in Furman, Alabama is tied to a tragic event that ended up unfolding during a time of hardship in the village. It all began during a hot and dry summer when water sources were scarce. Dr. John Purefoy, a respected local physician, relied on a large well in his backyard, but as the drought continued, the well ran dry. Preoccupied with treating patients suffering from malaria, he directed his servants to fetch water from a spring near Savage Hill, which was about a mile away. The servants, however, returned with disturbing accounts of strange occurrences at the spring. They claimed that a witch guarded the area, spilling their buckets before they could carry water away. Also adding to their distress, they described the presence of a black cat with intense menacing eyes that just lingered near the spring. Although Dr. Purefoy dismissed these tales as just mere superstition, he eventually decided to have a new well dug on his property to avoid any further complications. Aware of the sandy soil surrounding his home, Dr. Purefoy instructed the well diggers to construct a wooden casing to support the walls of the well as they dug. He personally demonstrated how this should be done, emphasizing the importance of safety. Once satisfied, he left the workers to continue the job. Initially, the crew followed his instructions, carefully building the casing as they dug over 10 feet down. However, eager to speed up their progress, they decided to abandon their precautions, with their reasoning being that the work would go faster without the casing. This decision, though, would end up proving disastrous. The digging continued uneventfully until the end of the day when the well suddenly collapsed without warning, burying one of the diggers alive under tons of earth. His fellow workers desperately tried to rescue him, digging frantically into the night. Dr. Purefoy returned to oversee the rescue efforts, but as time passed, it became clear that the man could not have survived. Despite faint cries for help that some claimed to hear beneath the sand, the crew eventually had to abandon their efforts, leaving the man's body entombed in the collapsed well. The tragedy is then said to have left an indelible mark on the town, but the events that followed ensured that it would not be forgotten. A bare, sunken patch of earth remained where the well had once been, and no grass or vegetation would grow there, despite attempts to cultivate the ground. Locals also began reporting strange occurrences near the site itself. Residents of a nearby servant's house spoke of a black hand that sat on the bare patch at night, weeping and begging to be freed. The mournful voice could be heard saying, "Get me out of here, please, please get me out." According to these accounts, the spirit's tears were so potent that they burned the grass that tried to grow over the spot. But yet, the sounds of the crying spirit eventually became a haunting presence for those who passed near the site after dark. Many avoided the area altogether, unwilling to risk hearing the spectral pleas or encountering the ghostly figures said to linger there. Stories of the spirit then spread, and the well's tragic history was passed down through generations, blending into the folklore of the region. Mobile's pipe-smoking captain. The story of Mobile's pipe-smoking sea captain is one that begins with a reclusive man who kept to himself, spending his days pacing his yard on State Street, wearing his captain's cap and often seen smoking his pipe. He didn't interact much with his neighbors, and though he lived in the town of Mobile, he seemed far removed from it. His life appeared to center more on the memories of the sea, a connection he maintained by regularly visiting the docks to watch ships come and go. Rumors then started circulating that the captain had left his ship after a falling out with another officer, but his life on land was lonely. Initially, a few old friends from his seafaring days visited him, but their visits grew less frequent until they stopped entirely. The captain's days followed a predictable rhythm, being that he would spend hours at the docks watching freighters load and unload cargo, and as the sun dipped lower, he would head home, often stopping under the oaks in Bienville Square to rest and reflect. But the quiet sadness of his whole existence eventually overcame him. One evening, neighbors heard the sound of a gunshot followed by the heavy thud of a body falling down the stairs. Rushing to his home, they found the captain lifeless at the foot of his staircase, his pipe still emitting faint smoke and a pistol nearby. Years later, when William Smallwood and his family moved into the house, they started noticing some strange occurrences. There were unexplained sounds at night, being loud thuds that seemed to echo from the staircase. Mrs. Smallwood even claimed that she once saw a figure in the garden who was a man who matched the captain's same description down to his cap and pipe. When she looked closer though, he vanished. The scent of tobacco often drifted into the kitchen too, despite no one smoking nearby at all. These happenings freaked out the family, and over time, they became convinced that the captain's presence still remained in the home. The story stayed alive, passed through generations, and retold by locals. Though the Smallwoods left in the early 1900s, the memory of the captain didn't fade. Neighbors on State Street spoke of his ghost appearing in the backyard, particularly near an old pecan tree where he was said to just sit and smoke. And the backyard itself is also something interesting, since it seems perfectly maintained even though no one tended to it, and dogs often reacted strangely there, barking and growling at nothing visible. One of the most compelling accounts came from George, a man who moved into the house decades later. As a child, George heard older residents speak of the captain as if he still roamed the property. When George's family finally moved in themselves, they too experienced unexplainable events like doors opening on their own, faint sounds of footsteps, and glimpses of something or someone out of the corner of their eyes. George even recalled seeing a figure in the backyard that resembled descriptions of the captain. The Ruined Banker. The story of John McGee Parkman and the haunting of Huntingdon Hall is a tale of ambition, ruin, and restless spirits. Stuyvesant Hall, a grand Greek Revival mansion built in Selma, Alabama in 1856, is the setting for this enduring legend. Its stately architecture and elegant grounds provided the backdrop for both the happiest days of Parkman's life and the torment that would follow him into death. John McKee Parkman, a prominent figure in Selma's post-Civil War society, became the president of the First National Bank of Selma at the young age of 29. For a brief period, his life seemed charmed. He had a loving wife, 2 young daughters, and a prestigious home at Stuyvesant Hall. However, his decision to invest heavily in cotton, a speculative venture meant to capitalize on a volatile market, led to his downfall. When cotton prices plummeted by 50%, Parkman's investments collapsed, leaving the bank unable to cover the losses. And the involvement of federal funds in the bank's operations only heightened the crisis. General Wager Swain, a Union officer overseeing the Selma district, acted swiftly, shutting down the bank and arresting Parkman. He was then imprisoned in Castle Morgan, a former Confederate facility notorious for its grim conditions. While there, Parkman hatched an escape plan, but accounts of his fate diverge. Some say he was shot while climbing the prison wall, while others claim he drowned in the Cahaba River or was even crushed under the paddle wheel of a waiting steamboat. Whatever the truth though, Parkman's death was sudden and shrouded in mystery. Almost immediately after his death, strange occurrences began at Stuyvesant Hall. Servants and visitors reported seeing Parkman's ghost wandering the estate, with his figure often glimpsed near the Scuppernong Arbor, where some believed his body had been secretly buried. Others claimed to see him leaning against the iron railings of the portico, lost in thought or staring out from the mansion's cupola, as if keeping watch over the home he had cherished in life. These sightings, which were consistent, fueled the belief that Parkman's spirit was unable to find peace. The injustice of his disgrace, compounded by the sudden and violent nature of his death, was thought to bind him to the site of his happiest memories. Also, witnesses often described a sense of melancholy surrounding his spectral presence, as though his ghost was searching for a resolution that eluded him in life. Stuyvesant Hall, which is now a house museum, continues to draw visitors interested by its beauty and its ghostly legend. The mansion's storied history and reports of supernatural activity make it a cornerstone of the local lore there. Guides and guests alike recount unexplained phenomena, from cold spots to faint sounds of footsteps echoing in empty halls. Some claim to feel an unshakable sense of being watched, especially near the cupola and the arbor where Parkman's ghost was often seen. Rocky Hill Castle. Rocky Hill Castle, which was built in the 1820s by James E. Saunders in Cortland, Alabama, became a source of legends and mysterious tales over the years. The Grand Mansion, with its mix of Greek Revival and Italian architecture, was a symbol of opulence, but its troubled history gave rise to stories of curses, hauntings, and hidden treasure. The legend begins with a French architect who designed the mansion. After Saunders refused to pay the unexpectedly high cost of construction, the architect stormed off in anger, cursing Saunders and the house. This curse became a recurring theme in the castle's lore, with later generations blaming unexplained events on the architect's wrath. Stories emerged of ghostly hammering sounds emanating from the cellar, as though the architect himself had returned to dismantle the foundation. The noises would stop when investigated, but always resumed after the family left the area. And one of the castle's most enduring spirits is the Lady in Blue. Mary Saunders reportedly encountered this ghostly figure on the grand staircase, dressed in a faded blue gown. The figure vanished before Mary could speak, but her story was initially dismissed by her family until Colonel Saunders himself saw the same woman in the wine cellar. She smiled at him and disappeared, leading him to lock the cellar and never return. This mysterious apparition has also been called the Little Confederate Lady in some accounts, though her origins remain unclear. Another tale tied to the Civil War involves a treasure hidden on the grounds. As Union forces advanced, Colonel Saunders entrusted a servant with burying valuable items, including jewels, in a secret location. The servant, however, fell gravely ill and died before revealing the hidden spot. This lost treasure became a source of fascination for treasure hunters who scoured the property for years without success. And also another legend is the story of Joanna Swope, a later resident who claimed to see her drowned sister's spirit rising from Big Nance Creek, motioning for her to come closer. The image of her sister's ghost became a footnote in the castle's history of spectral encounters. But probably the most disturbing incident came decades later when Dr. Dudley Dunn Saunders Jr.'s wife, Mary, encountered a disembodied voice. While dressing one morning, she called out to any lingering spirits, jokingly asking them to speak up. To her shock, a voice answered, "Madam, I'm right here." The family then fled the house shortly after, leaving the haunted estate behind for good. The Drish House. The Drish House in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, often regarded as one of the state's most haunted locations, holds a reputation mixed with tragedy and mystery. Constructed in the 1830s by Dr. John Drish, the mansion was designed to reflect wealth and elegance, combining Greek Revival and Italianate architectural styles. It stood on a 450-acre plantation, with its grandeur marred by the sorrowful and sometimes sinister events that unfolded within its walls. Dr. John Drish, a widowed physician from Virginia, had already experienced significant loss before building the home. After the death of his first wife, Kathryn Washington, he sent their young daughter Kathryn to live with relatives, believing his grief-stricken home was no place for a child. He remarried in 1825, bringing Kathryn back to live with him and his new wife Sarah Owen, who was a wealthy widow. However, the father-daughter relationship remained fraught with tension. Local accounts speak of John's harsh treatment of Kathryn, including an incident where he confined her to her room with minimal food and water to force her to end a relationship he disapproved of. Kathryn eventually complied, later marrying another man, only to return to the Drish house after her marriage ended in divorce. John Drish himself was a pretty complex figure. Known for his charm, he was also plagued by a violent temper and a debilitating dependence on alcohol. His death in 1867 is surrounded by speculation. Some believe that he fell from a second-story balcony, while others say he succumbed to delirium tremens during an attempt to quit drinking, while another account claims he drunkenly fell down the stairs. Regardless of the exact circumstances though, his passing left Sarah devastated. She orchestrated an elaborate funeral and saved the candles used during the ceremony, declaring that they should be burned at her own funeral. When Sarah died in 1884, the candles could not be found, and her final wish was left unfulfilled, a detail many believe is central to the house's most enduring legend. This legend is the death lights in the tower that are among the most compelling stories tied to the Drish house. Witnesses over the years have reported seeing flames flickering in the tower late at night, so vivid that fire brigades were called on several occasions only to find no evidence of a fire. Some interpret these spectral flames as Sarah Drish's restless spirit, angered by the failure to honor her dying request. Others attribute the phenomenon to an even darker tale, a sort of runaway slave who hid in the tower but was captured and burned alive as punishment. And the tower, which Drish added during a later remodel, became not only an architectural focal point but also a center for ghostly activity. Accounts from the period describe the sound of stumbling footsteps and mournful cries echoing through the house, believed to be the restless spirit of Drish himself. Servants claim to hear these sounds, interpreting them as reminders of the doctor's tragic final moments. The tales of spectral activity, though, extend beyond the tower itself. Stories of apparitions, mysterious voices, and inexplicable events have persisted over the decades. One account tells of two young girls who lived in the house and felt a presence tucking them into bed and patting their pillows at night. Years later, a similar story emerged from a woman staying in the house during a visit, which further added to the legend of a protective spirit, perhaps one of the Drish family members or another lingering soul tied to the property. Kenworthy Hall. Kenworthy Hall, also known as Carlisle Hall, stands near Marion, Alabama, with its architecture and tragic stories mixed with the lives of its former residents. Completed in 1860, the house was commissioned by Edward Kenworthy Carlisle, who was a prominent landowner and cotton factor, to reflect his family's wealth and stature. Designed by architect Richard Upjohn, it featured a grand 4-story tower that would later become central to one of Alabama's most well-known ghost stories. Anne Carlisle, Edward's daughter, grew up in the house, often retreating to the tower that she loved. During the Civil War, Anne fell deeply in love with a young man from a neighboring plantation. The couple envisioned a future together, but they decided to wait until the war ended before marrying. Before the young soldier left for battle, they made an arrangement. His servant, Big Tom, would return with news of his fate after the first battle. A white flag would signal his survival, while a red flag would mean he had fallen. As weeks turned into months, Anne watched tirelessly from the tower, awaiting Big Tom's arrival. One afternoon, the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears, breaking the tense silence. Anne rushed to the window and saw Big Tom riding toward the house. In his hand, he carried a dark red flag. Overcome with grief, she let out a piercing scream and, in her despair, threw herself over the stairwell, falling 3 floors to her death. By the time her father reached her, Anne was gone. Her tragic end became one of the most enduring elements of the house's story, with many claiming her spirit still lingers, bound by the sorrow of unfulfilled love. Visitors to Kenworthy Hall have long reported hearing faint cries emanating from the tower, especially on quiet nights. Some claim to see a shadowy figure pacing the room as though searching for something or someone that never arrived. These accounts have kept the story alive, turning the once grand home into a place of fascination for those interested by the past's lingering presence. Over the years, the house experienced periods of neglect and vandalism, which only added to the mystery. Windows were shadowed, plasterwork defaced, and the stained glass that once covered the main doors were destroyed. The Ghost of the Tombigbee. The story of the Liza battle begins in the mid-19th century when steamboats served as lifelines along the Tombigbee River, carrying goods and passengers between towns like Columbus, Mississippi, and Mobile, Alabama. Built in 1852, the Liza battle was considered a grand vessel, often referred to as a floating palace because of its elegant design and impressive features. The steamboat played a vital role in the bustling river trade, carrying bales of cotton, passengers, and hopes of prosperity. It even hosted notable figures, including former President Millard Fillmore, who was entertained aboard during its early years. But the Tombigbee River, with its unpredictable currents and frequent floods, posed significant challenges for steamboats. The Liza battle, though renowned for its elegance, was not exempt from the risks, narrowly avoiding disaster on several occasions. On February 28, 1858, it departed Columbus for Mobile, carrying 50 to 60 passengers, a crew of 45, and over 1,200 bales of cotton. Flooded waters and plummeting temperatures set the stage for tragedy. In the early hours of March 1st, sparks from another steamer, the Warrior, ignited the cotton aboard the Liza battle. Fueled by strong winds, the fire rapidly consumed the vessel, leaving passengers to choose between freezing in the icy river or facing the flames. Pilot Daniel Epps steered the steamer into trees, enabling some to climb to safety, but many perished in the freezing waters or the inferno. By the time rescuers arrived, 33 lives had been lost. Then, in the aftermath, the Liza battle became the subject of sorrowful remembrance and eerie tales. Locals among the Tombigbee began reporting strange phenomena in the years following the disaster. Fishermen and river travelers described encountering a thick fog on cold nights from which the faint outline of a burning steamboat could be seen. Some even claimed to hear distant cries for help mingled with the sound of rushing water and crackling fire. These accounts gave rise to the belief that the Liza battle continued its doomed journey, trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. One particular story recounts a fisherman near the site of the wreck who noticed a glowing fog rolling down the river. As the mist neared, he saw the faint image of a steamboat consumed in flames. Though terrified, he listened closely and heard faint voices calling for rescue echoing across the still night. Startled, he fled the scene, vowing never to fish in that part of the river again. Such stories are not isolated though, but many locals and travelers have shared similar experiences. The sightings are often tied to specific conditions, being cold, foggy nights when the river is high. These elements seem to trigger a replay of the tragic events, as if the river itself holds on to the memory. Ghost of Gaineswood. Evelyn Carter's story is a haunting tied to Gaineswood Plantation in Demopolis, Alabama. Gaineswood, which was originally built in 1842 by General Nathan Bryan Whitfield, is a Greek revival mansion that underwent 2 decades of construction. Initially a simple log cabin, it was transformed into a large plantation home with elaborate gardens, stables, and slave quarters. After the death of his wife Elizabeth in 1846, General Whitfield hired Evelyn Carter's sister as a live-in housekeeper to help care for his young children. Evelyn, hailing from a prominent Virginia family, stayed at Gaineswood during the winter to keep her sister company. Evelyn was a talented musician, frequently playing the piano in the parlor, where her music became a source of comfort for the family. Her relationship with General Whitfield, marked by shared musical interests, added warmth to the household. During her time at Gaineswood, Evelyn fell in love with a Frenchman who had settled in the area, possibly among the Louisiana exiles who cultivated olives in Demopolis. The couple planned to announce their engagement in the spring, but a dispute led Evelyn to angrily throw her engagement ring across the garden. Her fiancé departed and didn't return. Following this emotional turmoil, Evelyn became seriously ill, likely with pneumonia. The harsh winter conditions in Alabama, marked by freezing temperatures and icy ground, made burial impossible. Evelyn's body was then placed in a pine coffin sealed with rosin and stored in the cold, dark cellar of the mansion until the ground thawed in the spring. It was during this time that unusual occurrences began. Residents of Gaineswood reported hearing piano music echoing from the parlor even though no one was there. Footsteps also emanated from the cellar, growing louder as they seemed to ascend the stairs before abruptly stopping at the door. The children also often heard sounds of running in the hallways at night, prompting their caretaker to check on them, only to find them still in bed. Overnight guests also reported hearing loud, unexplained noises, which left many too disturbed to stay in. Despite Evelyn's body being returned to Virginia for burial in her family's cemetery, these paranormal disturbances persisted. Visitors to Gaineswood still claim to hear faint piano music and footsteps, especially near the parlor or cellar. Some have also reported seeing a shadowy figure moving through the hallways or catching glimpses of movement near the mansion's grounds. Hell's Gate Bridge. Hell's Gate Bridge, located in Oxford, Alabama, is a site that has become mixed with local lore and eerie tales, earning its infamous name through decades of storytelling and urban legends. Officially opened in 1917, this single-lane bridge has long been the subject of strange stories which blend historical facts, regional traditions, and ghostly encounters. The bridge, which was constructed after years of delays, was rumored to have a troubled beginning. Local accounts claimed that during its construction, several workers mysteriously disappeared. Some attributed this to poor record-keeping or dangerous working conditions, while others whispered darker explanations. A local figure, Old Man Gillertoy, was said to have hired men under questionable circumstances, leading to speculation about what might have happened to those who vanished. Then, by the 1950s, the bridge had become a focal point for ghost stories. One of the most well-known tales centers around a tragic accident involving a teenage couple. They had been out driving late at night, possibly under the influence of stolen liquor, and decided to stop on the bridge. According to the story, the boy then turned off the car's headlights, a common prank intended to frighten his date. Witnesses, including a man named Ammon who was walking nearby, reported hearing the car rev its engine and skid, leading to the vehicle breaking through the bridge's barrier and plunging into the creek below. The aftermath of the incident has been recounted in multiple versions. Some say both teenagers perished, while others claim the boys survived but was left mentally unwell, muttering about having glimpsed the gates of hell. These stories laid the foundation for the bridge's enduring reputation as a haunted site. It was said that if someone stopped their car on the bridge at night, turned off the headlights, and looked in the rearview mirror, they would see the fiery entrance to hell itself. The legend evolved further in the 1980s when two boys reportedly reenacted the ritual of stopping on the bridge at night. Upon turning off their headlights, they were said to see the ghost of the teenage girl who had died in the accident. Descriptions of her ghost depict a pale, waterlogged figure with lifeless eyes and damp hair, sitting silently in the backseat of their car. By morning, the boys returned to find wet marks on the backseat, which was said to be a sign of her presence. While there's no verifiable evidence of these events, though, the stories have still persisted. However, the bridge's dilapidated state eventually led to its closure. By the late 20th century, the structure had become too unsafe for use and barriers were installed to prevent access. But despite its physical decline, Hell's Gate Bridge still remains a popular subject in Alabama's folklore. Aunt Jenny Johnston. Aunt Jenny Johnston's story begins in the 1860s in the rugged terrain of Alabama's Bankhead National Forest, a region which is steeped in history and conflict during the Civil War. Jenny and her husband Willis Brooks ran a tavern and inn while raising 10 children. Their lives were far from ordinary as they provided refuge to Union supporters and Confederate deserters who sought safety in the dense forest and hills nearby. This act of defiance against Confederate loyalty did not go unnoticed and eventually drew the ire of the Home Guard patrol. The Home Guard arrived at their home under the pretense of either drafting one of their sons for military service or punishing Willis for aiding deserters. They lynched him from a tree near the family home, and as he struggled for his life, their eldest son John tried to intervene but was shot by the guards. Afterward, the men shot Willis as well and left the family shattered by their brutality. Jenny, devastated by the loss of her husband and eldest son, reportedly made her surviving children swear a blood oath using their father's blood, vowing to seek revenge against all 8 members of the Home Guard responsible for the murders. The story of Jenny's revenge has then been passed down with vivid details. It's said that she began by killing the leader of the Home Guard and using his skull to fashion a soap dish. She trained her children in marksmanship, and together they sought out those who had destroyed their family. While they succeeded in killing 7 of the 8 men, the campaign came at a heavy cost. Each of Jenny's sons died from gunshot wounds during their quest for vengeance. Jenny is said to have kept a wooden cane, carving a notch into it for every Home Guard member her family killed. The last member fled upon hearing that Jenny and her children were after him. She then lived to the age of 98, outliving all but one of her children, and reportedly expressed pride on her deathbed in her sons' efforts to avenge their family. Over time, stories of Aunt Jenny Johnston have blended with local folklore. Many claim her ghost haunts the land where her home once stood. Visitors to the area report encounters where she appears at their cars, threatening them to leave before vanishing. Others speak of eerie green lights moving across the property or disembodied footsteps echoing in the night. On Halloween, some say she appears in cars traveling through the area. These tales, embellished over generations, served as warnings to keep locals, especially young people, from wandering the forest after dark. While much of her story is rooted in documented events, some details still remain debated. Historical records verify that Jenny Johnston, originally Jenny Brooks, and her husband did help those who were hiding in the forest, and that the Home Guard did kill her husband and son. However, certain elements like the use of a human skull as a soap dish or the blood oath involving her children have drawn skepticism, especially given accounts of her strong Christian beliefs. Whether these details are fact or embellishment, they've still cemented her as a figure of fascination. Jenny's home, which stood as a physical reminder of her story, eventually burned down in the early 2000s. Boyington Oak. The story of the Boyington Oak is one of Mobile, Alabama's most unusual and enduring tales. It's rooted in events that occurred in 1834 and mixes together elements of friendship, betrayal, love, and tragedy. At its center is Charles Boyington, a young printer who arrived in Mobile during the cotton boom of the 1830s, hoping to find fortune in the bustling city. Boyington, originally from Connecticut, was known as a gambler and a dreamer. He lived in a boarding house with Nathaniel Frost, a co-worker at the Mobile Chronicle. The two shared a close friendship, with Boyington caring for Frost when he fell ill with tuberculosis. In turn, Frost helped Boyington with rent payments. Despite these bonds of friendship, events took a dark turn in the spring of 1834. Boyington had recently fallen in love with Rose de Fleur, who was a wealthy young woman whose father disapproved of their relationship because of Boyington's modest status. Rose and Boyington became inseparable, but his devotion to her cost him his job, as he spent his time writing poetry and dreaming of their future rather than focusing on his work. Then, on May 10, 1834, Boyington and Frost were seen walking together near the Church Street graveyard. Boyington later returned home alone around mid-afternoon, giving vague answers when questioned about Frost's whereabouts. That evening, he boarded the steamboat James Monroe bound for Montgomery, having purchased pistols and a dagger earlier that day. The following morning, Frost's body was discovered hanging from a tree near the graveyard. He had been brutally beaten and left for dead, with his body covered in gashes. News of the murder then spread rapidly, and Mobile's mayor offered a $250 reward for the capture of the killer. Suspicion then quickly fell on Boyington. Authorities intercepted the steamboat and arrested him, finding him playing cards in the ladies' parlor. Boyington was then returned to Mobile, where public outrage against him was immediate and unrelenting. Cries for swift justice filled the streets. His trial was hastily arranged, and with incompetent legal representation, he was found guilty of Frost's murder and sentenced to death by hanging. Despite the verdict, Boyington maintained his innocence. He insisted that he had been wrongly accused and hoped for a pardon that never came. On the day of his execution, Boyington made a final bold declaration. He proclaimed that an oak tree would grow from his grave to serve as a proof of his innocence. Shortly after, he was executed and buried near Bayou Avenue in downtown Mobile. Then, in the years that followed, a large oak tree did grow from the site of Boyington's grave. Known today as the Boyington Oak, the tree has become a symbol of his final words and a source of interest for those who visit. Many believe the tree serves as a testament to Boyington's innocence, while others view it as a natural occurrence steeped in eerie coincidence. Meadow Man of Alabama. The Falkville Meadow Man is a mysterious figure associated with a highly unusual encounter that occurred in Falkville, Alabama on October 17, 1973. Jeff Greenhaw, the town's police chief at the time, was off duty when he received a call about an unidentified flying object in a field near the town. What began as a routine response to a strange report turned into a bizarre experience that left Greenhaw questioning the nature of what he had witnessed. Upon arriving at the scene, Greenhaw initially found no evidence of UFO, but soon encountered a figure that defied explanation. Described as a humanoid in form and standing over 6 feet tall, the figure appeared to be encased in a reflective material resembling aluminum foil. The surface of the figure was smooth and highly reflective, producing various effects under different light angles. Greenhaw also noticed that the figure's movements were unnatural and mechanical, lacking the fluidity of human motion. He compared its gait to a robot, likening it to the machine from the television show Lost in Space. Greenhaw also managed to capture 4 Polaroid photographs of the figure, although they were of low quality because of the limitations of the camera and lighting conditions. When he addressed the figure with a simple greeting, it gave no response. But after Greenhaw activated his patrol car's blue lights to better observe the creature, it began to move away with remarkable speed. He pursued it in his vehicle, reaching a speed of 35 miles per hour over a field, but was unable to keep up. The entity then exhibited a bounding motion, covering great distances in each leap, and eventually disappeared into the darkness. Greenhaw's chase ended when his vehicle hit a ditch. In the years that followed, Greenhaw faced significant personal and professional fallout because of his account of the encounter. His photos and statement garnered local media attention, but skepticism and ridicule soon followed. He was dismissed from his position as police chief, his marriage dissolved, and his home was later destroyed by fire under mysterious circumstances. These events led him to retreat from public life for many years. Greenhaw later expressed regret over coming forward with this story, citing the profound impact it had on his life. The 4 Polaroid photographs he took that night were kept in his possession for nearly a decade. However, in 1983, Greenhaw reported a break-in at his home during which the photos, along with his service revolver and shotgun, were stolen. He found the coincidence of these stolen items being directly tied to the night of the encounter deeply disturbing. Speculation about the nature of the Metal Man has persisted over the decades. Skeptics argued that the incident was a hoax, with some suggesting the figure could have been a person in a costume. Others have theorized that it might have been an extraterrestrial being or a robotic entity of unknown origin. However, no definitive evidence has emerged to confirm or debunk the encounter. Sally Carter's grave. The story of Sally Carter is a notable ghost tale from Huntsville, Alabama, and centers on Cedarhurst, which was a mansion built in 1823 shortly after Alabama became a state. Sally Carter, the figure tied to the legend, was a young girl who visited her sister at Cedarhurst in 1837. Not long after her arrival, she became seriously ill and passed away before her 16th birthday. Her death and burial on the mansion's grounds set the stage for the ghost stories that would follow. In 1919, one of the earliest documented accounts of unusual activity associated with Sally's grave involved a 17-year-old boy from Dothan, Alabama. While staying in an upstairs bedroom at Cedarhurst, he dreamed of a violent thunderstorm that caused gravestones in the family cemetery to fall. In the dream, he encountered a young girl who asked him to set her tombstone upright. The next morning, he went to the cemetery and found Sally's headstone lying face down. The incident disturbed him so much that he left Huntsville and never returned. Then, over time, stories of paranormal activity at Cedarhurst attracted the curious. Children and adults sought to explore the mansion and cemetery, eager to witness something inexplicable. However, repeated vandalism to Sally's grave led to her remains being relocated to Maple Hill Cemetery. Despite this, reports of ghostly sightings and unexplained phenomena still continued. Visitors claimed to hear a young girl's voice, see shadowy figures, or feel an eerie presence within the mansion. Then, in the 1960s, Cedarhurst became known as a Lover's Lane, and sightings of a glowing red lantern near the old Ewing family cemetery added to the legend. Teenagers dared one another to approach the mansion, which had fallen into disrepair and was considered uninhabitable by then. In 1982, a developer even purchased the property and transformed the mansion into a clubhouse for a gated community. As part of the development, the Ewing family cemetery, including Sally Carter's grave, was moved to Maple Hill Cemetery. During the relocation, workers lifting Sally's casket reportedly witnessed something unusual. The lid fell off, revealing no remains, only a strand of pearls and an African juju bag lying inside. This discovery reignited interest in Sally's story, with some interpreting it as evidence of her spirit's lingering presence. Sloss Furnace. The Sloss Furnaces in Birmingham, Alabama have long been the focus of legends tied to the site's grim industrial history. Originally constructed in 1881 by James Wither Sloss, the furnaces quickly became a key component of Birmingham's rise during the industrial era. However, the facility's dangerous conditions and the numerous tragedies that occurred there have given rise to a haunted reputation, that continues to interest locals and visitors. Operating in an era before labor protections, the furnaces were a perilous workplace for the hundreds of men employed there. Tragic accidents were a frequent occurrence, with workers succumbing to falls into molten iron, deadly gases, and machinery-related mishaps. One especially horrifying account involved a man whose clothing became caught in a massive flywheel, dragging him into the gears as horrified coworkers watched. These gruesome deaths contributed to the growing belief that the spirits of those who perished remained tethered to the site. One of the most enduring stories is that of Theophilus Jowers, who was an assistant foundryman who died in 1887 when he fell into a vat of molten iron during an equipment repair. It's said that pieces of his body were recovered, but much of him was consumed by the intense heat. Workers later reported seeing a figure resembling Jowers supervising the furnaces, appearing impervious to the searing environment. His presence became so synonymous with the furnaces that some believed he had vowed never to leave as long as the furnaces stood. Another prominent tale centers around James Slag Wormwood, who oversaw the graveyard shift in the early 1900s. Known for forcing his crew to take extreme risks, his shift saw an unusually high number of fatalities. In 1906, Wormwood himself fell, or as some claim, was pushed into a furnace. Reports of his ghost then persisted, with visitors and workers describing an aggressive presence that shoves or yells at them as though enforcing his harsh rules even in death. Other legends include the spirit of a young woman who allegedly ended her life by jumping into one of the furnaces after becoming pregnant out of wedlock. Her ghost is said to manifest in an unusual form, being a white deer that appears during significant events at the site. Additional sightings include shadowy figures on catwalks, disembodied voices, and unexplained movements or objects, all of which add to the mystery surrounding Sloss Furnaces. And modern investigators have sought to document these phenomena, with paranormal groups capturing compelling evidence, including electronic voice phenomena and unexplained photographs. In one instance, a team recorded what sounded like a child's voice offering lunch, which was a reminder of the workers' families who lived on the property and delivered meals during breaks. Shadows, cold spots, and a palpable sense of being watched are also common experiences reported by visitors and investigators alike.